I want to take this moment to introduce you to someone that gives our speaker his claim to fame. Carolyn, would you stand for me so people can see you? Carolyn Fagel Saliba. Carolyn is one who works with us at our church school. She is one helping us to develop philanthropic services. And what happened with her is her father was the pastor of Miami Temple. And often you would see her mother here in our congregation. She always sat in the very back. But Carolyn would be the one who would bring her to our church. But her father was the pastor of Miami Temple and got to know Dottie Palmer. And so as a result, Dottie Palmer was the guest that she always came to, and that's why she came to the North Lake Church. And I'll tell you right now, Carolyn is helping us to develop our church school into becoming a community school. That's a revolutionary idea to some, but you know where our school is, and you've driven by it. It's the big building on the right-hand side of 441 with the big stained glass windows in it. That's the Gateway Christian School. And we have right now 17 students in that school, and we're very pleased with that. Now, that gives me an opportunity to introduce you to Dr. Saliba. Dr. Saliba is one that I knew at Andrews University just in passing because my second major was business administration. And as a result, I knew of him. And I know I've seen him in a number of places speaking, and I don't know whether it was with hospital or whether it was with community services or what, but the name Saliba stuck with me for a long, long time. And so this morning, I will introduce you to Dr. Saliba, who is in leadership. He has become the director of the Leadership Institute, which is the one who is training future leaders for Advent Health. There's a person that got him into that, and that's Tom Warner. Tom is a part of the quartet that's singing today, and I'm just thrilled with what our hospital system is doing, and I will tell you right now, the spirituality of our hospital is due to these two men's leadership. Dr. Saliba's message this morning is treasures in earthen vessels.
Thank you very much, Brother Wayne. To be honest with you, whenever I come to this church or any church, I always end up sitting in the back. So I don't have the courage to tell you, come up. So as my mother used to say, if Muhammad wouldn't go to the mountain, then the mountain should come to Muhammad. So you'll forgive me if I come down here so I can be close to you, because up there it's a little far away. Thank you so much for that special music. Appreciate it, Brother Murphy. Actually, Tom hired me in '93 to be at the college that was started with Dave. I'm blocking on Dave's name now. Dave Greenlaw and myself. I was academic dean. So I've been here in the Orlando area since '93. It's a few years. And a few of us have aged in the process. We live out on Lake Yale and come to church here occasionally. We still drift down to Forest Lake, the Sabbath school there. So Wayne hooked me up today, and I'm sorry that Pastor Bassett's wife's surgery created this situation, but I'm glad to be here and to worship with you. My life began on the island of Trinidad, which is in the Caribbean. I think Lincoln knows what I'm talking about. We kind of knocked around together down there. A little bit our paths crossed. I was in the north part of the island, which is honestly a very tiny island by standards of continental United States. It's just about 2,000 square miles in size. I lived in the north. He lived in the south. And as all human nature goes, the north is better than the south, right, Lincoln? I know he will disagree with that, and he will say the south is better than the north. But isn't that the way each of us always wants to say we are better than the other ones? Part of the clay that's in the earthen vessels. So I was about 12 years old. My mother was a school teacher before she married, and there were 4 of us, 2 boys and 2 girls. I was the eldest. And she was always very curious about the Bible. Brought up as a very conservative Roman Catholic. In those days, they didn't have permission to read the Bible, and she was a little willful, so she always wanted to know what was in this Bible. One Sunday morning, as she was just sweeping through the house, those were not the days of vacuum cleaners, turned on the radio. It weren't even the days of television. And she just heard just the ending of a radio invitation that said, "Send for the free Bible correspondence course, Box 55, Los Angeles, California." She said, "What?" So she sent for it, not knowing who sponsored it. If she had, she probably would not have, and started studying the lessons, and I forget which lesson it was. 5 or 6 or whatever, there was a discussion on the Sabbath being the 7th day, and it was Saturday, and it's kind of like, oh my word, I'm going to church on Sunday, and here is this commandment that says Saturday is the Sabbath, and should be going to church on Saturday. So she was there pondering this thing and wondering what to do with it when there was a knock on the door, and a lady arrived. She was a call porter. So she came in and did her pitch, as all call porters do. And finally, my mother said, "Do you know that the Bible says that Saturday is the Sabbath? It's not Sunday?" And she says, "Yes, I do." "Oh, really? Is there a church that goes to church on Saturday?" And she says, "Yes, there is." And she said, "Where is that church?" And she told her where the church was. And so she said, "Well, maybe I ought to go to that church and see what it's like." So the next Saturday, now my father had a small retail business selling clothing, and the business opened 6 days a week. On Saturdays, all businesses closed at noon. So he would leave for work in the morning, and so she knew that he left for work in the morning. He didn't know all of this was going on at the time, and it's kind of like, well, I could get out to that church and get back before noon, and he wouldn't be any the wiser. So she dressed. She left me in charge of the 4 of the other 3, and she went to this church. And it was so different. It was noisy. They had Sabbath school, you know. I mean, it wasn't the quiet, reverent church that she was accustomed to. And then when the ministers got up on the platform about 11:30, she slipped away, caught a cab, and got back home in time for noon when the old man would be there. And she was just enthralled by the experience and told us about it. So the next Sabbath, she took 2. She took me and my youngest sister, and she left the second girl with my brother there at home. And we did the same routine, and that went on for a few weeks. And of course, by the time the old man got home, the table would be laid, and we'd be ready for lunch around 1, and everything was great. Until one Sabbath in Sabbath school, I don't know if they still do it, they gave my sister a memory card verse on a little card. I never got one. And I was a little put out by the fact that she got one. And so around the lunch table there, while we're eating, we're fighting over this card. Let me see the card. Finally, the old man looks up and he says, "What's happening there?" And "What is that you have in your hand?" he asked my sister, and she said, "A memory verse card." A memory verse card? May I see it? Where did you get this? She was too young to know the value of a lie. So she said, I got it in Sabbath school. It's kind of like, Sabbath school? What is Sabbath school? And the cat was out of the bag. The horse was out of the barn. All hell broke loose. It's kind of like, are you taking my children to that church? You didn't tell me. And it was hell. And you could cut the ice in the house. And this sort of things got really grim. And it was dark. And it was serious. And as I observed the two of them, it was like, well, you know, she was the angel and he was the devil. She was doing the right thing and he was doing the wrong thing. The strange thing was, to my 10-year-old mind, that's how it looked. But I noticed she was powdering the devil's nose every morning and making his cup of coffee and packing his lunch to go to work. We had food on the table. We didn't lack for clothes, and the devil was going to the market and making the groceries. And it's kind of like, this is a little confusing to my 10-year-old mind, that wanted to see everything as either black or white, good or bad. And it wasn't quite working out that way between the two of them. It was a few years later, as a teenager, I discovered 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7, where Paul says, we have this treasure in earthen vessels. And the lesson came to me and has stayed with me for all my life, that every one of us is a mixture of good and bad, of right and wrong, treasure in earthen vessels. Now, the Greek for the earthen vessel is that it's just clay. Whenever we come to that fateful day, none of us likes to think of that fateful day. And the minister stands and says, dust to dust, ashes to ashes. There's a recognition in the fact that we are vessels of clay. Genesis says God took the dirt and shaped it and breathed in that dirt the breath of life, and man became a living soul. And Paul says, look, nothing has changed over all the years. We're still a mixture. We're not fine china. And even fine china is clay. They just baked it a little more in the oven. I was asking Carolyn the other day, what is Melmac? I can't even remember, because she says it's plastic. Same thing. Well, maybe that's not clay, that's a petroleum product. But bottom line is, it's not worth a whole lot. We like to think we're worth a whole lot. But in reality, there's treasure in the earthen vessel. And we tend so often to forget the fact that every one of us is treasure, and what the meaning and the implication of that might be. What it means is that every one of us has dirt in our lives. You see me here in my nice coat and looking holy and all that type of thing. Trust me, there's dirt in my life. And there's dirt in your life too. Every one of us. But it's so easy to draw up our robes of holiness around us and to say, I am better than you. I come from North Trinidad, you come from South Trinidad, and North Trinidad is better than South Trinidad. You know, that's what Lucifer said. Why are they honoring Christ? I'm better than he. That's the root of all sin. That's the dirt. And God has entrusted that treasure in that dirt. So that was the first lesson I learned. There is no right and wrong. There is, and we must be careful. So Paul is saying that on the one hand, he's defective. He's a defective, erring human being. On the other hand, God has entrusted the wonderful treasure of the gospel to him, as God has entrusted that treasure to every one of us. Now, think about this for a minute. If we're all defective individuals with dirt in our lives and we come together and we form a church, do you think the church has dirt too? Well, Umatilla has dirt. And Mondora has dirt, but not North Lake, right? We all. And I have good authority for saying that we have dirt in the North Lake Church, not just in the individual lives of its members. Mrs. White says, feeble and defective as the church might be. That's a recognition that there is dirt in the church. Not just the North Lake Church, not just the Umatilla or the Mondora Church, but in the Seventh-day Adventist Church with its headquarters in Washington, D.C. Feeble and defective. Some of us go through life, as I were thinking, it has to be all treasure, or it's not good, I'm leaving it. The fact of the case is, we always have to live in that zone of gray, where in the best of circumstances, the clay comes through. We wish it were not so, but a recognition of that fact makes it very helpful to me when I encounter the shortcomings of others and when I experience my own personal shortcomings as well. That I could say, thank goodness I serve a God who is loving, generous, kind, and patient enough to entrust the treasure of his gospel in a piece of dirt like me. In an imperfect church like ours, because the statement doesn't end simply with feeble and defective, which is an acknowledgement of the dirt. It says it is the object of God's supreme regard. And that shifts the perspective from the dirt to the treasure. So the first point I'd like to make is we live in an imperfect world. We ourselves are imperfect. We are members of an imperfect church, but there is treasure in that imperfect church. So let's talk about the treasure. I have to start by telling you that one of my favorite stores is Harbor Freight. You all know Harbor Freight? I know every one of them, from Apopka to the one here in Mondora to the one going up the road to Leesburg. I can't, and you know, the wretched thing is when you walk in, they're laid out the same way and they have the same things. They're not any different. I just like to walk around and look at them. Part of the reason is I like tools. I just love tools. Now, the problem is I don't know what to do with the tools. But I like them. Just last week, I had someone cut a tree down in the yard. He left the stump up about 3 feet and was sprouting up, and I decided, I got to take this stump out. So I lay for days planning how to take this stump out. I have an electric chainsaw. I have a gas chainsaw. I can't get a gas chainsaw to start. I don't know how to get it to start. It's probably fallow so long, it probably needs to be serviced. I don't know how to service it. Someone told me buy gas without ethanol in it. For the small motors, they would work better. So I tried the electric saw. Well, the electric saw is a little tiny, looks like 12-inch, 16-inch. You couldn't make anything, cut off a few little pieces and the chain flew off, and that was the end of that. So I went down to Home Depot, and I rented a big chainsaw. 24-inch blade, I think. I was scared like anything to start it because I figured I could chop my hand off. Anyhow, I get there and I'm chopping away. After about 4 cuts, blade flew off. The chain flew off. So I fought for half an hour and put the chain, finally got the chain back on. It wouldn't start. And I'm looking at the clock that's running and I'm paying for it. So I get in the car, I drive back down to Apopka, I take the soy, and I said, look, I can't get it to start. It was working beautifully. So he said, well, you know, you need to tighten this chain after 3 or 4 cuts. You know, you got to. I said, well, nobody told me that. So he looks at it, he says, well, I tell you, you put the chain on backwards. It would never cut even if you got it started. Didn't know that. So he put it back on, and he started it, and he said, well, don't choke it. By the time you get up there, it should be fine. It was too hot, and you choked it. Yeah, I did. I saw the guy choke it to start it, so I tried to choke it. He said, well, you probably choked the carburetor. So driving back, I said, you know what? I like tools. I just don't know how to use them. So I finally called a friend and said, come over and cut this thing for me, please, which he did. Wasted my money to rent it. Every one of us likes the treasure. Like I like tools. The question is, do you know how to use the treasure? And therein lies the problem. We all like the treasure. I mean, if I ask you, everybody to throw their hands up. The real question is not, do you like the treasure? That's why you're here. I lay down this morning and said to Carolyn, that rain is so cozy, the bed feels so warm. I have to congratulate you for coming out this morning. It would have been so tempting to lay in bed and just cover up. But you like the treasure, so you're here. The question we all have to answer is, do you know how to use the treasure? You see, Christ said the Pharisees didn't know how to use the treasure. He said they went out and they worked assiduously. They worked hard to make a convert, and they made that convert twice the sinner of hell as they were. That's what Christ said. And essentially his argument with the Pharisees was, it wasn't that they didn't like the treasure, it was they didn't know how to use the treasure. And they misused it, and they made people worse off because of it. Are you with me? When I was a student, going to do my doctoral work at Northwestern, we had an introduction. All the young bucks and gals who were going to do the different programs, marketing, finance, management, etc., brought us in, and they were having a courteous introducing us to each other, to the faculty. We're going to begin the program. And I had heard there was another Seventh-day Adventist who was was coming to the program in finance, another area, but he would be there. And so as we introduced ourselves, I said I was from Berrien Springs. I saw him look at me and gave me a nod because he knew Berrien Springs is a Seventh-day Adventist, Vatican. He has to be a Seventh-day Adventist. Who else would be in Berrien Springs? So as soon as the group broke, we walked across to each other, and he said, you must be the other Seventh-day Adventist. Yeah, so we introduced ourselves, and we are talking, and one of the matronly ladies, a volunteer, coming around with her tray and her mug. She said, would you like some coffee and donuts? And before I could say, thank you, but we'll pass, he said, no, thank you. You see, we're Seventh-day Adventists. We don't drink coffee. And she said, oh, really? That's fascinating. Yes, she said. And as for the donuts, do you know if they have lard in them? Because we don't eat. Well, the ground could have swallowed me up. He didn't know how to use the treasure. I fast-forwarded to when that lady went home, what she would say to her husband about Seventh-day Adventists and coffee and lard in a donut. So he liked the treasure, he just didn't know how to use it, in my opinion. So I was talking to Randy Hafner, one of the executives down at Advent Health. Tom hired him too. He was 26 when Tom hired him, sent him up to a hospital in Volusia County. As I understand it, and Tom will correct me if I'm wrong, there were 2 hospitals in the land, and we were going to try and move one to Orange City. And Randy was the young man sent up there to manage the transition. They weren't originally owned by us. We were negotiating the ownership, I think the one that was going to be moved was owned 50-50 by the tax county there, and it was a gentle move away from what you would call a public hospital to what would eventually become a Florida hospital 100%. Today it is, but in those days it wasn't. And so Randy says somewhere in the mid-90s, I think it was 95 or so, September 11th was the last day they were going to move to Orange City. They moved, and he was walking through the old building, just making sure, you know, like when you go in a motel and you spend the night, you want to make sure you didn't leave anything behind. Just checking, got up to one room, and there was a piece of paper on the bulletin board, and there were check marks. This date we do this date we do that, this date we do. September 11 we move, and a sentence that says, eat it all up, last day to eat bacon. Before we move to the Adventists who don't eat bacon. That's what they knew about us. We don't eat bacon. I'd have felt a little better if they had said, eat up all the triples you could get. But I think Jesus would have preferred if they had said, see how they love one another. That would have been the right use of the treasure. And that is the use of the treasure that he would have people say of us today. My question to you is, what do people say of the church in North Lake? And what do people say of you as an individual? You don't eat bacon, you eat stripples, or see how you love one another? Jesus says in Matthew, by this shall all men know that you love one another. That's the right use of the treasure. In other words, I have had the encounter of Adventists, brethren, sisters, who, in my opinion, my humble human opinion, didn't know how to use the treasure, and they saw themselves as gatekeepers. God wants us to be caretakers. I would suggest to you that think about that as you go from day to day. How am I being a caretaker? And am I behaving like a gatekeeper? We don't do that. Sorry about that. Or can you find a way to be a caretaker and witness to the love and the treasure rather than demonstrate the weakness of the earthen vessel? That was point number 2. Point number 1, every one of us is imperfect. Don't get so absolute about black and white. It ain't there. That's not life. There's treasure and there is dirt in every one of us and in the organizations that we build. You could like the treasure, but if you don't know how to use the treasure, it's a very unfortunate thing. And so my final point to you is, how should we live? What choices do we have? In light of this text, we have this treasure in earthen vessels. How then should we live? I'd offer to you 3 choices. Some people dwell on the dirt. That's their choice. All they could talk about is the dirt. The shortcomings, the failures, why they don't like this one, why they can't stand the other one, why that church is not a church they go to anymore, etc., because all they could dwell on is the dirt. That's their choice. That's their perspective. Other people go to the other extreme, and all they could talk about is the gold, the treasure. And they twist and turn to make everything to rationalize it, to be able to say, that was, in other words, if you understood. And they are living in a la-la land and denying reality. All you could do, you could focus on the fact. 3rd choice, there's treasure in the earthen vessel. Yes, there are shortcomings. Yes, there are weaknesses. My job is to magnify the strengths and to appeal to the better angels of our human nature rather than to nail someone in the ground because you caught them in something wrong. And if we would do that for one another and try to draw out the very best, then we would be behaving the way I think our Lord would like us to behave. That's the choice. I think of Joseph. You remember Joseph? Remember the story, the experience, the brothers that tried to kill him, they sold him into slavery, and he finds out now that he is almost next to the Pharaoh. The brothers show up. He had all the power in the world that he could use. He could have looked at the dirt. He could have dwelt on the dirt and he could have punished them for the dirt. But he chose instead to bring out the best. And it's eloquent in its language to listen to the brothers defend each other before this strange governor of Egypt. It says Joseph wept to see the change that had happened to them. And he was used by God to bring out the very best. There's a little joke, you'll indulge me, of two competitors. You know, I am better. And the angel appeared to one. Everything one did, the other one had to outdo him. And the angel appeared one day and said, tell you what, I'm going to give you everything you want. But just know that whatever I give you, I'm going to give twice as much to the person across the street. What would you like? He thought for a minute and he said, make me blind in one eye. It's a joke, but it's looking at the dirt instead of trying to bring out the best in the other person. So today I say to you, we have this treasure in earthen vessels. There's dirt in the lives of every one of us. And we have to learn to accept and live with that fact. You can focus on the treasure. You can learn to use the treasure and have the treasure use you in the right way or in the wrong way. Just because you say you like the treasure doesn't mean it automatically steers you in the right direction. And finally, what choice will you make? Will you choose to bring out the best in others, or will you revel in the misery and shortcomings of others? That's a choice you have to make. Just recently, I went with a group to Gettysburg and listened to the horrible war that was fought there, the lives that were lost, the courage that was shown. Then we went to the cemetery, and there's a statue of Abraham Lincoln standing there. And then they told us of the day when they came together to have a celebration and to bury the dead, as it were, or to recognize the sacrifices that had been made. And they hired an orator from one of the big universities, a man by the name of Everett, to speak, and he spoke for 2 hours. I was asking Wayne, how long could I speak? He told me I could speak until 5 this afternoon. No, he didn't say that. Everett spoke for 2 hours. Can you imagine? Eloquence. Then as an afterthought, just an afterthought, I said, well, the president is here. Maybe he could say a few words. And Lincoln took the platform. Spoke for 2 minutes. It's become immortalized. Nobody could remember what Everett said. One of the things that Everett said, that Lincoln said, I want to leave with you, as the choice that we make about the treasure and the clay. This is part of his 2-minute speech. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to achieve lasting peace among all nations. That was then, and I tell you, this is now. Those words are as relevant today in the course of our nation, in the course of our church, in the course of this church, and in the course of our individual lives as it was then. We have this treasure in earthen vessels. I'll conclude with a little joke of two little boys, very difficult. Their mother was at her wit's end, what to do with them, how to handle them. Finally, she went to the priest and said, I need help. I don't know what to do with these two boys. They're just in mischief all the time. He said, well, send one to me, one at a time. So the first one came in, and there was the priest there, sitting at his desk, looking very austere and serious, and the little boy comes in, he barely sits in the little chair, his legs up in the air, and the priest in a thunderous voice looks down at him and says, where is God? And he doesn't know how to answer the question, and the priest says, I said to you, where is God? And finally he stands up, puts his hand on the desk, leans over and said, young man, I'm asking you, where is God? And at that point, he just takes off out of the priest's office and he just disappears. Later on that afternoon, the other brother comes into the house and he's looking for his brother, and the brother is hiding in the clothes closet. He said, what's wrong? He said, we have a problem. What's the problem? God is missing, and they think we have something to do with it. I would suggest to you this morning that if God is missing in Eustis, if God is missing in Leesburg, if God is missing in Umatilla, we have something to do with it. And to the extent that we can show malice toward none, charity for all, and firmness in the right as God gave us to see the right, and as we strive to finish the work, men and women, to the extent that we are successful in doing that, men and women would look at us and look at our church and say, in the words of the hymn, worthy, worthy is the Lamb that made these people treasures, such treasures in earthen vessels. God bless you.